What up, Fight World? It's your boy Ego, and I'm back with some more boxing. So recently, they said Pacquiao is going to fight fourth quarter of this year. They were initially talking about him fighting in September, possibly a tune-up fight. Pacquiao has stated, or Bob Arum, Team Pacquiao, they've stated they do not want a tune-up fight. They don't wish to go that route. They want him get him back in the mix with just a named opponent. They don't want to take a step up like a Humberto Soto, someone who hasn't looked too good recently, and he's ready to get back. Initially, the reports were saying September. Now it looks like October, and they're looking at China as a possible place to host the venue and host the fight. Pacquiao is complaining about taxes. Pacquiao and Marquez actually about having to pay expensive taxes while fighting in the U.S. So they're looking at China. China is a big industry. I mean, there's billions of people live in China. If you guys watch the Zhao Shiming fight, his debut on HBO, the 4 round fight, they show a preview to Macau, and it's supposed to be like Las Vegas on steroids, real big, industrial, a lot of bright lights and money comes in and out of there, big population. So it looks like they're talking about having a Pacquiao fight. As far as an opponent, Freddie Roach has been on record saying Pacquiao wants a Marquez, but Marquez looks like he is looking in other directions and wants to go for his fifth belt by facing Timothy Desert Storm Bradley. I like that a lot better than Pacquiao Part 5 personally. Pacquiao Part 5 and Marquez generates more money, but it's a fight we've already seen. And to me, Marquez did in the fourth fight what neither fighter had been able to do in the previous 3 fights. Therefore, that chapter, at least for right now, should be closed to me, and they can fight other people, maybe meet somewhere, depending on how they look in their next fights. But I don't think it should just be the same 2 fighters fighting, do like they did earlier from fight 1 to fight 2. They had other fights in between that. So to me, I'm okay with that happening, or not ever seeing a Pacquiao versus Marquez Part 5, my personal taste. Um, so Marquez is looking at Bradley. I like that fight a lot. I think it's an excellent matchup. Two thinkers. As far as Pacquiao, they were talking about having him and Mike Alvarado. Initially, Brandon Rios was in the mix, but he lost to Mike Alvarado in the rematch. So it looks like Mike Alvarado, being the current winner, is in the running for that. Ideally, I hope they make Timothy Bradley versus Marquez and Ruslan Provodnikov versus Brandon Rios, Manny Pacquiao versus Mike Alvarado, because those were the names that Top Rank was throwing around, and I like those matchups the best. You can mix and match those guys all kinds of ways, and that's the matchup I like the best. They're talking about making Mike Alvarado versus Pacquiao. I want to give you some insight to what I think about this particular fight. It's a decent fight, but I do think that it is a fight to give Pacquiao his confidence back and his fans' confidence back. Pacquiao has lost his last 2 fights, whether you thought he lost to Timothy Bradley or not. Either way, he didn't look great in that fight. And either way, as the record sits on both fighters' records, Timothy Bradley is still undefeated, and Pacquiao lost that fight. So you can argue it was a robbery. I'm not here to debate that. It's a loss. A loss is a loss is a loss. If you go to Wikipedia, you go to their Google or whatever, it shows a loss on their record. When they're being announced in future fights, it's going to say the undefeated Timothy Bradley, and it's going to have Pacquiao, and they're going to show how many losses he's taken in his career. That's going to be one of them. So he lost that fight. Then he got knocked out by Marquez. He can't really afford to lose a third time consecutively. So I honestly think they're choosing Mike Alvarado, someone he's expected to beat, and rightfully so. I really don't see Mike Alvarado beating Pacquiao for a variety of reasons, and I'm going to explore those in this video. One, Mike Alvarado is a fighter coming from the 140-pound division, going up 7 pounds, which is where Pacquiao's been fighting at 147. Maybe even they make it at a catch weight, but either way, I guarantee you that catch weight would be closer to what Pacquiao is used to fighting at, maybe 144, 145, as opposed to closer to the weight that Alvarado has been fighting at, which is 140. So again, if they make this, even if they do it at a catch weight, which they might not even do, he's going to probably have to come up 4 to 5 pounds. So that's one disadvantage. And then if he has to come up 7 pounds, then that's definitely a disadvantage for him. because he's not used to taking a punch at that weight class, whereas Pacquiao got, if whether he got knocked out or not, is used to fighting fighters at 147. So that's one disadvantage for Mike Alvarado. Two, if you look at Brandon Rios, look at Mike Alvarado's last probably 3 fights. They've been wars. Brandon Rios, Bradis Prescott. Bradis Prescott was winning the fight, and he had Mike Alvarado seriously hurt. And that's Bradis Prescott, who's a decent fighter, a good fighter, but he's nowhere on the level of a Pacquiao. He's not fast like Pacquiao. He just has good boxing and good power. So I just really don't see Mike Alvarado beating Pacquiao. And again, Pacquiao did get knocked down in his last fight, but if you think about Mike Alvarado's last couple of fights, it kind of evens the score because they've all been wars. Bradis Prescott, he almost got knocked out, and he took some damage in that fight. Then he fought Brandon Rios. Brandon Rios stopped him, and he took some punishment. And that whole fight was a roller coaster ride where both fighters were taking blows, so they both got banged up. The second rematch was no different. They both got banged up. Even though he won, he was badly hurt in the second round. So again, even though Pacquiao got knocked out and Mike Alvarado didn't get knocked out cold per se, his last couple of fights have all been wars. So he's still taking some punishment. Now to go through a grueling fight, a grueling rematch with Brandon Rios recently, and to be fighting again this year against a step up in weight and a step up in terms of class, in terms of speed, angles. That's going to be a big, big bite for Mike Alvarado to swallow, in my opinion. And Brandon Rios is a puncher, no doubt about it. But in the first fight, that was Brandon Rios' first fight at 140. Now, he's naturally probably bigger than the weight class that he's been fighting at, and he was having trouble making the lower weight. But still, that was a fighter who came from 135 and never fought at 140, and he was able to stop you in your first fight. And I mean, that just says volumes. So think about Pacquiao. What is Pacquiao going to do? Again, I just really see this fight being a fight in order to bring Pacquiao stacks up by putting him in there with somebody who his style should beat, yet that person still has a significant name. People are going to remember the fight. Oh, this is the guy that just beat Brandon Rios, so it's definitely something they could sell. Mike Alvarado is a warrior, and they'll be able to sell it. So to the casual fan, they're not going to put it into perspective like I am. They're not going to be like, oh, okay, Mike Alvarado has disadvantage A, B, and C. He's coming up in weight to fight Pacquiao. He's been in wars his last 3 fights. He's much slower, etc., etc., etc. So to the casual fan, this is probably a great fight. I'm not saying Mike Alvarado stands no chance because it's boxing. He does have some pop to his punches, but we don't really know what that will be. He couldn't stop Brandon Rios, who has a hell of a chin, but we don't really know how that power will translate into 147. So realistically, I see this as being more or less a stepping stone to get Pacquiao back on a win streak or back with a W as opposed to taking another loss. They're not going to put him in there with somebody who, like maybe even a Ruslan Provodnikov. Put him in there with a Ruslan Provodnikov, even though that was his sparring partner or whatever, that might be bad news because Ruslan definitely has punching power to stop somebody. So I don't know. I just really don't see them. I think Pacquiao has such a fan base. They still want to be able to use that. They don't want to. They're not willing to let that die down. And the way to do it is to get him back winning. So I think they selected Mike Alvarado, which is probably what they're going to go with. It's not definitive, but it's somebody who you can make a case for, deserves the fight. But realistically, based on the disadvantages I kind of mentioned in this video, I don't really see Mike Alvarado beating Pacquiao. Again, Pacquiao's faster than Brandon Rios. He's going to approach you from way more angles than Brandon Rios, and you just had trouble in 2 fights with Brandon Rios, much slower. And I'm not shitting on Brandon Rios or discrediting him. He's a warrior. He has a chin. He's very entertaining to watch, but they're completely different styles. And his style meshes well with Brandon Rios, somebody who's a pressure fighter, who's a warrior, but they're slow, kind of like a Margarito. And then going up a step in class. That's like I said, that's a huge step up for Mike Alvarado to go from style A and have trouble with that to fighting a completely different style with probably more of what gave you problems in the Brandon Rios fight. Like I said, Pacquiao's faster than Brandon Rios. He fights at a higher weight division than Brandon Rios. He probably hits harder than Brandon Rios, at least in his respective division. So I just don't really see Mike Alvarado winning. Again, it's boxing. Anything can happen. Alvarado has a warrior spirit. I really just see this as more or less a selection to get Pacquiao back with a W. So yeah, I just really see Pacquiao has a huge fan base. Mike Alvarado, to me, with Top Rank, he's someone that's more or less expendable. For if you guys seen the Stallone movie, The Expendables, it's kind of like that, where he's somebody with somewhat of a name, but he's not a huge household name. He doesn't even, in my opinion, have a fan base as big as Brandon Rios. Um, just kind of like more or less an underdog from Colorado, and for that reason, he's more expendable. Pacquiao is a star who's been on various endorsements and commercials. Hennessy, um, he's appeared on Jimmy Kimmel numerous times. He's a more of an international star. So, as a company, you're going to try to protect your investment. So, Top Rank, I think that's what they're doing. They're trying to protect their investment, and they're going to give their star Pacquiao, make it as comfortable as possible in order to him to rebuild his name. So since he's not taking a tune-up fight, which would be smart, they're going to give him a style where he does have most of the advantages. He's going to have the hometown crowd. Pacquiao's obviously Filipino, and this would probably take place in China, but it's still an Asian ethnicity. So I guarantee you, majority of the fans would probably be rooting for the international star who's Asian, as opposed to the fighter who's American from Colorado, if they're fighting in Macau, China. So he's going to have the home crowd advantage, even though he's not from China. And he's going to have the weight class advantage. He's going to be comfortable with the weight, or more comfortable with the catch weight. It's probably going to be closer to what he's normally been fighting at in terms of Pacquiao. And then, I mean, he has most of the advantages. That's the best way to put it. Speed, angles. So that's just my personal opinion. What do you guys make of this fight? Mike Alvarado versus Manny Pac-Man Pacquiao. Again, I would definitely watch it to see it. It's new blood. It's a fight that we haven't seen before. Mike Alvarado, he's a warrior. He could prove me wrong. I thought Brandon Rios was going to beat him in the rematch, so I definitely could be wrong. And there's always the idea that Pacquiao might not be the same from the devastating knockout. He took a brutal knockout. So if Mike Alvarado was ever to fight Pacquiao, I would say this would be his most opportune time to upset Pacquiao based on what happened in Pacquiao's last two fights. So Alvarado really is getting him at a good time. If you look at it, Roy Jones Jr., he dominated the sport from the late 80s all the way to the early 2000s without being defeated, without any losses. And I don't consider the Montel Griffin fight a loss. He was DQ'd for hitting a downed opponent, but he was whooping Montel's ass, and I thought that was bullshit. And he rematched him, and I think he knocked Griffin out in one round in the rematch. So I don't really consider that as a true loss in terms of Roy Jones's legacy. His true loss wasn't until the one with Antonio Tarver. And then right after that, the very next fight, so he dominated from the late 80s to early 2000s. Tarver knocks him out. In his very next fight, he gets knocked out again. So it's perfectly possible. Stranger things have happened in boxing. If you get brutally knocked out, sometimes it just does something to your confidence, to your spirit. And as a fighter, to lose those types of things could be huge. You could still have all the skills in the world, but if you don't have the confidence, then, I mean, there's no telling how you're going to look in there. Look at Mike Jones. At one point in the 2000s, he was fighting like 7-8 times in 1 year, 1 calendar year. They were building him up. He was undefeated for quite some time. Randall Bailey slept him in their recent fight, and I haven't heard anything about Mike Jones since that fight. And Randall Bailey has fought Devin Alexander since. So I even at least heard from Randall Bailey, but the person that got knocked out, I ain't heard nothing from Mike Jones. So correct me if I'm wrong in the comments, but Mike Jones has been MIA since that brutal knockout. So again, anything can happen. Pacquiao did receive a brutal knockout, so maybe he's not the same. Maybe Alvarado will be able to crack him. Just from everything I could see, everything is really stacked against Mike Alvarado, from the crowd to the skills to the styles, everything. But I might be wrong, and we will see. But I would bet my money on Pacquiao as a betting man. Let me know what you guys think. Mike Alvarado versus Manny Pacman Pacquiao. As always, hate, comment, or subscribe. Till next video, it's Ego signing off.